Please join me in welcoming the Honorable Michael Williams. Commissioner, thank you.
You gave him 2 extra years.
Oh, I did? Okay, well, all right. That's why I didn't go into math, that's it. Commissioner, good morning, nice to see you.
Good to be back.
Thank you for being here. I thought we might start with the not at all controversial topic of spending on public education. You probably heard this week that the comptroller had some pretty good news about the current state of things and the state of things for the next biennium in terms of the budget. In view of the cuts to public education that happened in the last session, probably the biggest headline coming out of the session were the cuts to public ed. A lot of people think that if the economy is better and if the budget is better, that maybe we should put some money back into public education. Your boss, the governor, had a different point of view about this. His exact quote in rebuffing the calls to put money back into public education was, quote, "Under any scenario over the last decade, funding for public schools has been pretty phenomenal." Is he right that funding is not just adequate but phenomenal for public education?
Let's see if we can do this without sort of commenting directly on what the governor said.
Why?
First of all,
why not comment specifically?
Evan, come on. You're just starting, okay?
Oh, yeah. I got a lot more time to push you on this, so go ahead.
But let's do this. I mean, we're looking at perhaps, I think the comptroller said maybe an $8 billion surplus.
Right.
And much of that has probably already been spent. It's been spent in terms of what we have to do in terms of Medicaid, in terms of deferrals, in terms of shortfalls, things of that nature. So much of that has probably already been spent.
Right.
So that is unlikely to go into public education.
Right.
The comptroller also said there may be a 14.5% additional dollars available for the next biennium.
Yeah.
And we're going to let the 181 make a determination about how they spend that and how they put those dollars. But there is no doubt that we have put significant dollars into public ed, and I look forward to being part of the conversation about where we go forward from here.
I'm not asking so much, Commissioner, whether we've put significant dollars in. I'm asking whether we've put enough dollars in. There are a lot of people out in the community. For instance, several hundred plaintiffs engaged in a lawsuit that you may be aware of now.
I'm the defendant in that lawsuit.
Who might take a different position from both the governor in terms of phenomenal and in terms of you in terms of sufficient or adequate. I mean, I want to press you on this. Do you, as the commissioner, believe we're putting enough money in?
Evan, let's recognize, I'm the defendant in that case.
Right.
So I'm not going to give a deposition. No offense.
But you can offer a commissioner a point of view as to whether enough money is going into public ed without getting into the terms of the case.
Because I am the defendant in that case. Mm-hmm. I am not going to take this as an opportunity to give a deposition for that for that particular case and put myself in a position where I am testifying in a case when I have not been called as a witness, even though I'm the defendant.
Right.
So with all due respect, we're not going there.
Okay, well, let me ask you then, offline from the question of adequate or sufficient, let me ask you about whether you believe, as some do, that there's a correlation between spending on public education and performance. As I read the TEA's own data, the schools that are ranked at the highest level, at the exemplary level, seem to be spending about $1,000 more per student than the students at the bottom in the unacceptable schools.
I think what you really see when you look at TA data about who's an acceptable, academically acceptable school as opposed to an academically unacceptable school is that they have a different category of youngsters that they're dealing with, more so than dollars. That they're dealing with youngsters who are coming to school more prepared because, for the most part, their families are middle income and upper income families as opposed to families that are, let's say, middle income to lower income. That is the most driving factor in terms of educational achievement in this state. Not dollars spent. It's who they are when they come. Well, good morning. Who they are when they come to the classroom, as opposed to how many dollars are spent on them.
So it's a coincidence that the schools that are ranked by TEA's own metrics as the best schools in the state are spending $1,000 more than the schools that are ranked by TEA as the worst schools in the state?
I'm not saying that's a coincidence, but I'm saying the more significant variable, the more significant factor is who are these youngsters, and that's why for us as a state. Recognizing who we are as a state that is 60% of our nearly 5 million youngsters are economically disadvantaged. And 65% of our youngsters are brown and black. That's why we have to put on our backpack and walk up the mountain and say, we've got to take these youngsters to the plateau because that's the real challenge for us. It's not the dollars.
Yeah.
It is, unfortunately, it's the characteristics of the youngsters that we're trying to train.
So if that's the challenge, Commissioner, what's the answer? If the answer is not simply spend more money, which I think a lot of people in this room, despite the controversy over the question of funding of public ed, a lot of people would agree that money is not the only answer. What is the answer then if the issue is who those kids are coming in the door? How do you change that?
I think the answer is a number of things. We've got to put world-class instruction in front of every youngster in every classroom.
Right.
We've got to say that the job number one for us is closing the racial achievement gap.
Yeah.
And part of that is putting world-class instruction in front of every youngster. Part of that is making sure that those youngsters who are at risk, that we can do the best that we can for early school readiness, that we can build an accountability system that focuses on closing that gap, that we've got to say that every youngster in every classroom, that we've got to make sure that we spend more time in class and not in out-of-school suspension.
Yeah.
And we've got to use technology so we can do more things better, faster, and cheaper.
Can you do those things with the dollars now available?
Oh, yeah.
You think you can?
I think I can.
Right. So
you can. Now, there may be additional dollars. And look, the 181s just got here. They've been here 2 days. And they're going to have a vibrant, robust conversation about whether we need to add more dollars to pre-K or add more dollars to for technology.
Yeah.
And we're going to have that conversation. But today, we can do what we need to do.
Your position, Commissioner, on this subject, and I suspect I'm going to hear this again in the next half hour, is we're going to let the legislature do what it does. We essentially execute their will. Is that right?
That's what I do.
On the money. So then let me ask you about choice and vouchers, to pick up another topic, again, not at all controversial, that is likely to be discussed during the session. As you know, Chairman Patrick and Lieutenant Governor Dewhurst have put their flag down in saying that they intend to see some form of legislation on school choice. How you want to characterize it, choice vouchers, whatever, will be a big issue for them during the 83rd session. Can you tell me what the TEA position on this is, or what your position personally? I know that in a previous life, you have been an advocate for choice.
I have.
So in your new capacity, and from the agency's perspective, as this legislation courses through the Senate and then the House, where does TEA see this?
You know, I've learned two things during the 4 months I've been Education Commissioner. That everybody in Texas knows that 4 times 4 is 16. They talk about that in terms of the 4x4. And everybody knows that in 1990, I gave my first speech advocating for parental choice. In 1991, as an assistant secretary for former President George H.W. Bush, I was part of the team that developed his school choice proposal and initiative. In 1992, I wrote my first commentary, and I've been on panels all across this country advocating that position. But I'm in a different role today. And in this role today, I have to be an honest broker of the facts and the evidence.
Yeah.
And so I won't be walking the halls, talking to members, advocating that we expand to parental choice. I won't be giving speeches on the South Steps of the Capitol.
So if it passes and TEA has a role in that, fine.
Then we'll do it.
And if it doesn't pass, fine.
And if the members have questions along the way about how this is implemented, then we will answer that question. What I have to do is, if members see me as an advocate, then, and I find this curious, because the only people who ask me about this question are people who are opposed to parental choice. But anyway, if members see me as an advocate, they're not going to trust the evidence and the data that we get.
But of course, there are issues, Commissioner, regardless of the position you take on the legislation, which, you know, in fairness, we'd like to see the language. We want to understand what exactly is being proposed. But regardless of your position on it, there are going to be aspects of this that TEA would have a hand in implementing and have a lot to say. And one of the opponents of choice, in quotes, because again, we don't know exactly what it is, one of the concerns is that as public dollars migrate out of the public education system to schools that may not be subject to the accountability metrics that the public schools are, that's somehow a tripwire. You know, that's a bad thing, and that somehow is a concern. Have you thought about how an accountability system might be structured that would allow for such a thing in a choice system? I mean, engage us on some of the substance of it.
Evan, quite frankly, we are doing no work in the building at this time regarding school choice. There is no thinking No analysis going on in the building.
Right.
When we get a bill,
Yeah.
when we get a question, we'll respond to it.
Right.
But there's nobody scurrying around in the building right now.
No proactivity here as far as what happens.
Not school choice.
Yeah.
That's, at the end of the day, let's think about something.
Yeah.
In Louisiana, in Florida, in Wisconsin, in other places that have developed state-based school parental choice plans,
Yeah.
we have not seen a mass exodus to private schools or other learning opportunities, learning environments. That's likely to be the case, even if something is passed here in Texas, Diane. That's likely to be the case here in Texas. So at the end of the day, I'm still going to have nearly 4.9 youngsters in public school. We've got to focus, the 700 of us back at TA, on the 4.9, nearly 4.9 youngsters in public school, in public education.
Right.
So there's nobody back at TA now who's sitting down trying to figure out how you're going to implement a school choice plan. Mm-hmm. If we get a question, we're going to answer it as honestly as we can. If somebody asks for data, we'll provide it.
So you're not paying attention really on the funding stuff because you're a defendant in the case yet. You're not focusing on the vouchers and the choice stuff. What are you doing?
You know, come on, Evan.
Well, I'm not saying it with disrespect. I'm genuinely curious because I thought you were going to spend 15 minutes telling me all the work you were doing to prepare for choice. So what
you
are
haven't asked that. You haven't asked that.
Well, I'm asking it now. What are you doing?
In my 4 months, conversation I've had with whether it's superintendent or school board members and anybody else has been about accountability, yeah, we're gonna get to career tech, accountability. Yeah. And that's where, so what have I been doing for the most part? I've been having conversations with superintendents and school board members and parents and even youngsters about how do we improve our accountability system. And I've heard from superintendents and others that says that we got 35 different ways to fail. We got 35 tripwires. We're basing accountability system on the weakest link, the weakest subgroup. That we don't get credit for what we do well, we get punished for what we don't do.
Right.
And Commissioner, that ought not be the way we go. And so we've been thinking about how do we reform this? And so rather than basing the ratings for campuses and school districts on that one subgroup, we've been looking at moving to an index. And so
more like grades, is that right?
Well, at the end of the day, there'll be grades. But before you get to the grades, you got to figure out what you're going to base the grade on.
Okay.
And rather than on that single indicator, we're going to look at an index, and in that index will be, at least 4 parts. Okay. And those 4 parts will be, number, student achievement. That's sort of the way we do it now. Second will be whether this campus, whether this district is moving towards closing the racial achievement gap. Because in a state that is composed the way we are, that is fundamental to our future progress. And we want to close it, and we want to design a system that says, you can close the racial achievement gap by bringing the top down, but that's not what we want to do. We want to move and accelerate the floor going up. The third indices in that index is, are you gaining progress with your youngsters in your classroom? And the fourth one is
year over year.
Yes. Yeah. And the fourth one is, are these youngsters leaving college and career ready? So that's what I've been spending, quite frankly, the large part of my time on is looking at how do we design this system so that it's fair and more balanced for both students and parents and obviously and administrators in districts.
As you know, Commissioner, the question of how schools are rated has been a bit of a hot mess the last couple of years. The Texas Performance Measure and a lot of controversy associated with that. I think schools would like some clarity, but it does seem like we have shifted the yard markers a whole lot over the last couple of years. Do you think you can design a system that would have a little bit more permanence to it here?
Well, permanence depends upon the legislature, but I do think that I can design a system that has a great deal more agreement as to its validity. And in my early conversations with superintendents and school board members, there seems to be at least some real appreciation that this index is better than where we are today.
How can you assure us, Commissioner, that the schools themselves or the districts, as has happened in some case, don't game the system? to get their ratings or rankings to be better than they actually ought to be?
Well, I think there are two things. And, anytime you have a system that has real consequences, somebody is likely to try to cheat. But, we've asked, obviously, in terms of legislation, in terms of my LAR, for dollars so that we can guard against test cheating.
Right.
We now have done some things within the agency in terms of reorganization so that we're putting some additional resources, 1 or 2 FTE, to that regard. But the other thing,
let me stop you. Is it enough, Commissioner? Because we know the TEA sustained, as all of public education did, a pretty significant cut in the last session. And there has been some concern out in the world about whether you have adequate human resources and financial resources to do oversight of charters, to do enforcement on things like cheating and investigations. Do you have the manpower and the woman power within the agency to actually accomplish all this?
Evan, you know the answer that I'm going to give you before you asked it. That we're going to
say it.
We're going to do with what we have. We're going to take care of the job with what we have. But let me tell you what else we have. When you create a system that is not oppressive, and I would agree that the current system, based upon that weakest link, is an oppressive system.
Right.
When you move to one that's more balanced and that gives schools and districts credit for what they do well, there is less incentive to try to cheat.
Right.
And we will get a better judgment about what those campuses and those districts are doing.
Specifically, since you brought up cheating, I want to ask you very briefly about the El Paso ISD situation, where you've now asked for an investigation to see what happened, how TEA essentially missed what we now know to have been a pretty massive scandal that's resulted in jail time and all that. Do you believe the TEA in the end is going to be found to have done everything right? I mean, there are some people outside the TEA who are saying TEA talks a lot about accountability for the schools. Where's the accountability in TEA for blowing the El Paso ISD deal? Will heads roll in the course of all this?
We'll see. I mean, I asked for an investigation.
Right. But your position on the subject, Commissioner, shifted from the fall when you thought, well, we don't need an investigation. We don't really need an audit of this. Now you've decided, well, in fact, in retrospect, we do.
But Evan, let's say what I did.
Yeah.
I came in initially and said that there was no need for an outside inquiry.
Yeah.
I listened to others. I learned from others. I took the advice and counsel from others.
Right.
And then said, let's go ahead and have that inquiry.
Yeah.
So as an old prosecutor, let's allow the investigator to go and do his investigation. And rather than prejudge that investigation,
let's see what happens.
Let's see what happens.
Right. Let me come at this question of metrics and how we can count on the accountability system within the schools another way. There was a Department of Education finding a few weeks back that Texas in 2010-11 had a graduation rate, high school graduation rate of 86%. There was initially a lot of celebration of these numbers, why wouldn't there be? But then there was also some skepticism. I saw Bill Hammond here, and there are some other people in the room, not just Bill, who thought there's absolutely no way that this number is accurate. And in fact, as you know, there's been some question about whether the numbers that we hear on dropouts and graduation rate in the state have been cooked by one or another parties over the years. Do we really know what the graduation rate, what the dropout rate is? And if not, why not?
We do know, and I think the Department of Education told us what it was. But
you think that's a good number?
But I think it's a good number. But let's not get caught up in the number. We have mixed.
Why not?
We have mixed, because here's the deal.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to you want to celebrate that number.
Yeah.
But you don't want to get it twisted and get confused by that number. We've got a graduation rate that's increasing. We've got African American and Hispanic students in 4th and 8th grade in Texas outperforming African American and Hispanic students on NAEP in other states. All of those are great things. But we also recognize that we've got a college readiness score that's sort of, for Texas high school students, under 30%. So we've got some good numbers and we've got some bad numbers. If you look at the number of Texans that our state demographer says are going to be prepared to have a baccalaureate degree by 2040, we see those projections going down.
Right.
So we've got both good numbers and bad numbers. We've got to focus on the fact that we've got a lot to celebrate, but we've got a lot of work to do. A lot of work to do. So let's not get caught up in the fact that whether those numbers are, whether it should be 81% as opposed to 83, as opposed to 86. The fact of the matter, it's been going up on the graduation rate. But in fact, the other numbers have been going down.
Yeah.
And we need to be concerned about those as well.
You mentioned college readiness a couple times, so let me ask you, if you're dissatisfied with the level of college readiness today, how do you run directly at that problem specifically? What do you do about it?
You run through it since 1994, starting with Governor George Bush. This state said that there's a body of knowledge that every youngster in this state ought to be able to master before he or she is prepared to go get an associate's degree or baccalaureate degree, go to work, or go serve his or her country in the military. The way we get at it is that we maintain a fidelity to this accountability system and to the 4x4. There may be some modifications made to it, but we maintain a fidelity saying there's a body of knowledge we want youngsters to know. We want them to have 4 years of rigor in language arts and reading and writing. We want to make sure that youngsters can be able to write beyond 140 characters. We want to be able to say they got to have, yeah, no doubt. We want to say that you got to have 4 years of rigor in math. Now, whether that is, Representative Deschantel, whether that is math and geometry and you go down to Algebra 1 and geometry, whether that's Algebra 2 and pre-cal, not sure. Okay, maybe we can modify that. But they also need to have at least 4 years of rigor in science, in bio, in chem, and other. And they at least need to know American history, to know the principles of this country. That's how we get there. That's how we get them college ready. Right. Commissioner Paredes, Higher Education Coordinating Commission, and Commissioner Alcantara and I have probably met 4 times in the 4 months that I've been here. And we have committed ourselves to meeting every other month during our tenure, so we can have a conversation about the intersection between what we do. Yeah. Exactly. Right. And we can't get youngsters ready to go to either college or work without them having that foundational body of knowledge.
Commissioner, we skipped over, because we got a little bit onto another topic, the question of accountability. I'm not going to let you get away without addressing the question of student testing and accountability. You know that this has been an enormous controversy. Something like 85% or more of the school boards in the state, representing something like 90% or more of the students enrolled, have passed resolutions against testing in one form or another. You all put the pause button on the 15% rule earlier this year, but nobody thinks the problem is solved. Right. And there continues to be a lot of angst about the cost, about the days dedicated in the classroom to the test, and about whether the number of tests is the right number of tests. What should we do? What have we done wrong on this? Can you defend the system as it currently exists? Do you want to defend it? And if not, what do you think it ought to become?
Well, let's say I'm going to defend the system. I'm going to say that the system that the legislature developed is one that got us to the point where we could have at least some bragging rights as it relates to some of our subgroups, particularly African Americans and Hispanics. Does it need some degree of modification? I'll accept that. And where's that degree of modification? It seems to me that we ought to maintain, for the most part, the 4x4. And then, so where do we find modifications within that? It says that maybe we don't require Algebra 2. Maybe a youngster who wants to be in the construction business takes construction geometry. Maybe a youngster who is interested in going into another field takes aviation. Maybe, so we create, and I've asked superintendents to submit to me a series of math and science courses that have rigor, that can substitute for the 3rd and 4th year of math and science that I can submit to the State Board of Education, because they have the authority to approve those courses. Do we need 15 tests? Maybe the answer is somewhere between 6 and 12. But it seems to me that a youngster ought to have to pass a test, pass the English 2 and 3, ought to have to pass Algebra 1 and Geo, ought to have to pass bio and chem, ought to have to pass American history to be able to graduate from a Texas school and to move on to work in college.
Are you at all sympathetic, Commissioner, to the question of whether too much time is being devoted in class to teaching for the test?
Very much so. But let me tell you how I parse that.
Yeah.
Part of what's happening, and let's talk about the tests. There are the end of course exams,
yeah.
And then there's all the benchmark tests, the worksheet tests, the learning how to fill in the bubble, all of that test. That's local. State law basically says that you cannot have tests more than 10% of the school year. All that other testing is done by local school districts. And I have to admit that I've been advised by a former commissioner who said that any superintendent in the midst of high stakes testing that doesn't make sure that his youngsters know what they need to know by the day test comes is not worth his salt and is a fool, and that's why they do all the additional. But all that additional testing is done by them. But here's where we're gonna go. I would ask everybody, pump your brakes, slow your roll. We're only in the second year of STAR testing, and there's going to come a time, just as it did with TOS and TOCS, where there is a level of confidence that the TEKS developed by the State Board of Education, that the curriculum that's been developed, and that the tests are all aligned, and all you got to do is teach the curriculum. And if you teach the curriculum, it'll be all right. We're only in the second year. And because of the second year and the concern about we don't know, that's why we've got all this other stuff going on. But we'll get to that point if we give it some time. And I realize that there are youngsters who are in the middle of this process right now. I understand that. I understand that. And that's the reason why we tried to take some of the pressure out of the balloon. Right. That's why we took the pressure off to 15%. To take some of the pressure out of the balloon.
But of course, that was a short-term fix.
But the legislature, Evan, the legislature was short-term, but come on. On the 15%.
On the 15%.
The legislature is going to address that issue in the next 140 days. And before I had my conversation with the governor regarding this position, I watched the tape of the House Public Ed Committee hearing, and I didn't see a whole lot of gumption to continue 15%. So 15% probably is not going to stay here.
So your position, Commissioner, then on this issue, as on vouchers and choices, that the 181 are going to decide. And if the 181 decide to completely upturn the apple cart on this testing regime, you're going to be fine to go along with it.
No, well, hold up. On this one, it's a little bit different now. I think it's really important for us to maintain fidelity to what we've begun. Right. I believe that the increased rigor that we have in STAR is important for our youngsters. I believe that it's important for our youngsters to take those end of course exams in language arts in second, 2 and 3, algebra 1 and geometry. And you will see me walk in the halls.
So on this issue, you will take a position on this issue.
Well, on this,
but not on the other.
This is what vouchers is not, that's them.
That's them.
This is you. This is me.
Let me ask you, before we go to questions, if I can get you to take a position on one more issue. Let me try one more, and that's guns in schools. You may know that since the tragedy in Connecticut, Commissioner, Representative Villalba has announced plans to introduce a bill that would essentially establish a federal marshal-like program to improve the protection of our school kids and school teachers and school personnel around Texas. Representative Riddle has talked about expanding the opportunity for districts to allow school teachers to carry concealed handguns in class. Yesterday, new Congressman Steve Stockman announced plans to introduce a bill that would eliminate gun-free school zones. Is all of this good for Texas? Do you think that we should be having a conversation about giving more access to guns to school personnel or to outside personnel to protect our kids?
Yes.
Or possibly eliminating gun-free zones? You do?
Yes.
Would you talk about that, please?
You know, Evan, we have folks who are armed at the state capitol. I was in AT&T last weekend, and they had a armed professional in the AT&T stores. I was trying to get my new plan. But we send folks to schools, and rather than being armed, we have them to rely for safety upon hope. And so I think that somebody that has a concealed handgun license and somebody who has adequate training should be able, with the permission of their local school district, to be able to be positioned such that they can protect themselves and the youngsters in that school.
And it should be a decision district by district.
It should be district by district. I mean, we ought not, in my opinion, we ought not from the state level impose upon districts and demand that districts provide that permission. But that ought to, in my estimation, that ought to be allowed by local option of local school districts.
So as the Villalba or Riddle legislation goes through, you would actually speak out in favor of it as it comes before the legislation?
Well, let me look at the legislation. I haven't looked at the legislation, but let me look at the legislation.
Okay, good. Commissioner, thank you. We've covered a lot of ground in a short period of time. I appreciate you being a good sport. Let's give the commissioner a hand, please. Thank you.